Welcome to this short primer on learning agility. By the end of this mini webinar, you should have a better understanding of what learning agility is and how to apply it in practice. Learning agility as a concept has been around for about 20 years. Research has lagged behind slightly, and right now we're in the midst of a researcher-practitioner debate about learning agility. In the most recent I/O Perspectives journal, in fact, there were several articles about the concept of learning agility. The definition itself was hotly contested. The questions really are, is this just an ability to learn? Is it a skill, a motivation, a behavior? Is it just how quickly somebody learns? Or is it about somebody's desire to grow and learn? All of these things were swirling in the conversation about the definition. The common denominator, after you've read all of those articles, the common denominator is that learning agility, as applied and used in practice, is about the ability and willingness to learn from experience. That's the one thing that I think as practitioners we can all agree to. Why would this matter? Why would somebody's ability and willingness to learn from experience, why would that matter? Why should we care about that at all? The important thing to note is that learning agility isn't just learning in general. It's actually learning from experience, learning from day-to-day experiences, which is a little different, which changes the domain slightly and changes what matters. What we know from research, actually, if you look at the 2010 Journal of Applied Psychology and Academy of Management Journal, there were two articles in there that looked at developmental experiences and the impact on leaders and their development. And what they discovered is not everyone benefits equally from experiences. Some people learn and adopt new behaviors, and some don't. That's where learning agility comes in. Learning agility is meant to be the concept that moderates, that explains why not everyone either A, learns the same thing from experience, or adapts that learning to a new situation. So that's why learning agility is not just an ability to learn, and why willingness matters in this construct as well. Individuals who are high in learning agility can and want to learn and adapt from experiences. So that's an important thing to think about when you're considering learning agility as a construct. Now, when will it matter? If you look at that model again, there's really two conditions where learning agility is going to matter more. And one is any situation that requires ongoing adaptive behavior, either across time or settings. And where most of the learning about how to adapt those new behaviors comes from experiences. There's a lot of on-the-job experiential learning. So if you find yourself working with a population of people who require ongoing adaptive behavior, that they're going to learn from experiences, then what do you do with this? What do you do with learning agility? There are two things you can do with it. You can screen or select for it, or you can develop it. Now, this has most often been applied in the context of leadership, more importantly to high potentials. So people use it a lot to say, how can I identify or select my high potentials, and then how can I develop them around the concept of learning agility. Now, that has been applied in other situations. This is more recent. For example, I know an organization in Germany that uses a lot of the apprenticeship model, and they're thinking about using learning agility to help screen people into their apprenticeship program. The idea being in apprenticeships, you learn from experience. And so they think someone who will be a better apprentice is someone who has higher learning agility. So they would use learning agility as one of several factors that they would use to screen people into that apprenticeship program. I think it's important to note all of the rules that apply to selection. Should you be looking at a particular dimension or construct and use it to screen for, all of the same rules about selection apply here. So if you're going to use it in jobs other than leadership, it needs to be a job where you can validate easily that being higher in learning agility will in fact influence performance in a meaningful way. But what's really important, whether you're just going to use it as it has traditionally been used in leadership, particularly high potential, or expand it to some of these other roles, you really do have two choices. Screen to select people in, or develop. consider this. I think this might influence your decision somewhat. Lombardo and Eichinger, who originally came up with the idea of learning agility, when they originally talked about it, they said this is basically a strong individual difference to some extent, and about 10% of the population is going to be high in learning agility. They're just using the normal distribution curve idea. If this was normally distributed in the population, about 10% would be high in it. If that's true, then selecting and screening on it may overly restrict your pool. So you're not going to set a minimum cutoff score that's fairly high for this because you're going to really restrict your pool of candidates. So what you probably want to do is have it as one factor of many in choosing people, either for position or for high potential. And more importantly, beyond screening for it, you probably want to develop it as well. So there are some tools available for you. 3 organizations who have very popular perspectives or viewpoints on learning agility and tools attached to it. Center for Creative Leadership, Korn Ferry, and Hay Group. Center for Creative Leadership has, if you look at it here, you'll see what factors they consider to be representative of learning agility. So they get a little more specific. So we said learning agility is the ability and willingness to learn from experience. And what they've done is say, well, here are the behaviors or the dimensions that we think reflect this. So if you look at Center for Creative Leadership, you see innovating, reflecting, risking, performing, etc. I should note defending is actually a derailer. So the higher you are in defending, the less learning agile you will be. Korn Ferry has a similar set. They have 5 dimensions: change agility, people agility, mental agility, etc. And the Hay Group, which actually calls it their growth factor inventory or growth factor index, they have 4 dimensions as well. You probably see similarities across these. In fact, we tried to line these concepts up so you can see the ones that are most similar. Innovating is got some similarity with change agility, which has some similarity to eagerness to learn. The other thing to notice here is that to some extent, this is a bit of a mix. Sometimes they're behaviors, sometimes they're attitudes, dispositions, skills. All of them are mixed in to some extent in each of these models and across these models. But these are the big 3. These are the big 3 popular practical views in practice and the tools, and I'll show you in a second the tools that they use to help you put this into play. There is one thing I want to show you though. There's also an alternative view, an alternative way of looking at learning agility. It's in process now. It's not actually been released yet, but it's an attempt to sort of separate those things that are more about motivation or the willingness to learn versus those things that are more about ability to learn, and separating those from the behaviors that you would see, the learning behaviors or practices that you would see. So that's what's on this slide here. This essentially takes all of the factors that you saw on the previous slide and rearranges them somewhat. Not really a new concept in here per se, but just organized slightly different, so that you say the raw material, the willingness to learn from experience, the ability to do that together should equal the displayed learning practices. So just one more way to think about learning agility, how to divide it up so that you can decide how you want to select and or develop it. So there are some tools already out there that can help you if you're going to either select and or develop for it, and this is the list here on this table. They're organized according to assessment type. So you could use manager ratings of learning agility. You could do interviews. You could do others' observations of people, like in a 360, a self-assessment inventory, so a more personality-based assessment. And there is even, not ready yet, but soon to be released, an online simulation where you actually put people in an experience and judge the extent to which they learn from that experience. You'll notice on the right column, I actually tell you some sources for each of these. I have yet to see someone release a manager judgment rating tool. For the most part, I know that people create their own homegrown one. So they say, here are the dimensions we believe are important to learning agility, and then they create manager ratings around that. There's a really nice tool from Korn Ferry called Learning from Experience. That's a really nice interview guide. There are at least 3. These seems to be the most popular assessment type actually are the assessment types that are other ratings of behavior. So you'll see that Korn Ferry and Hay Group and Center for Creative Leadership each have a tool there. In terms of self-assessment, you have two very new ones. Korn Ferry has a new tool called VIA Edge, and Center for Creative Leadership has their Learning Agility Assessment Indicator. Both very new tools that try to get more at the more stable personality-based dimensions behind learning agility. Now, there's a very popular way, it probably is the most popular way that learning agility is used. It is most often applied to leadership, most often applied at the high potential entry point. So that's what we've shown you here. Is a popular recipe here is a combination of select and develop. So you select early. You actually try to up the inflow of learning agility into your leader pipeline. So you try to make sure that those who are coming into the pipeline have as high a representation of learning agility as is possible. And you would use this, most likely you would use the self-assessment tools to screen for that. You could use 360 ratings as well. But if you really want to get at sort of the stable trait-based things, these self-assessment inventories are a good way to do that. And then you would develop from there. So you would develop your high potentials and maybe even all your current and aspiring leaders. So beyond selecting for it, you're going to focus on developing it. And there's a process over there in the right column that says you would use it. It's a really great place to use a 360 tool is to help people understand where they have gaps with regard to learning agility. Create a planned path of experiences. So look for some key leader experiences that you could have people chart a developmental path around. And then around those experiences, you would create a structured process of learning. So it's a structured process of reflection and documentation of lessons learned so that you can help build that learning practice habit. Now, there are a couple key resources. I haven't given you everything that's out there, but if someone, actually when I have colleagues who call me and say, I want to quickly get up to speed on learning agility, here are the things I refer them to. Great series of articles in Industrial and Organizational Perspectives. The focal article by DeRue on learning agility, and then a series of commentary articles. I also think the new paper by CCL, by Center for Creative Leadership, on learning about learning agility, another great resource to really quickly get you up to speed on the concept. And then if you want to dig into the history a little bit more, again, I think it helps to know where it came from. And so the Leadership Machine by Lombardo and Eichenker is really one of the first depictions of the concept, where it came from and how it matters. There's a brand new book, though, by Evelyn Orr from Korn Ferry called Becoming an Agile Leader. This is really great for developmental advice. I think the potential for this concept is beyond selection. I really think it's about helping leaders develop learning agility, helping them become more learning agile. And I think Evelyn Orr's book's pretty good there too. Then I've given you a somewhat more radical reference here. Carol Dweck, who's a social psychologist in California, has a really nice book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And really, it's about having a learning mindset, but I actually think that relates quite a bit to learning agility. So if you find yourself trying to create tools or resources to help an organization you work with develop learning agility, those last two I think are really great resources for you. So that's everything I think you need to know to quickly get up to speed with the concept and to consider how you might want to apply it. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks very much.